Construction worker answers call in Japanese in front of his boss. The next day he quits. The construction site was bustling when Richard's phone started ringing insistently in the pocket of his worn-out uniform. Richard answered the call and, to everyone's astonishment, began speaking fluent Japanese, complex words flowing naturally from his mouth, while his boss, Frank Williams, stood frozen a few feet behind, clutching the project blueprint he had harshly criticized just minutes earlier. "Hai, wakarimashita. Raishu no getsu yubi ni kaigi o settei shimasu." The words came out perfectly as Richard walked between bags of cement, gesturing naturally as if it were his native language. The other workers stopped what they were doing. Mike dropped his shovel. Dave turned off the cement mixer. Even the foreman, Old George, took off his helmet and scratched his head, completely baffled. Frank Williams squinted, trying to process what he was hearing. Was this the same Richard he humiliated daily? The same man he called ignorant in front of everyone? The same construction worker he made a point of belittling in every meeting? The conversation in Japanese continued for several more minutes. Richard discussed technical details, mentioned figures in yen, and talked about schedules and structural plans. His posture had completely changed, back straight, gaze focused, voice firm and professional. When he finally hung up, a heavy silence fell over the construction site. Richard slipped the phone back into his pocket and picked up his trowel as if nothing had happened. "Richard!" Frank tried to speak, but the words died in his throat. "Yes, Mr. Williams?" Richard replied with the same humility as always, eyes down, posture hunched, his usual stance whenever the boss approached. You speak Japanese?" "A little, sir." "A little?" Frank laughed nervously. That didn't sound like a little. Richard shrugged and went back to work, spreading the cement mixture precisely over the bricks. His calloused hands moved with the experience of someone who had done this for years. Frank stood there, watching. Something didn't add up. For the 3 years Richard had worked at his construction company, Frank had seen him as just another laborer, replaceable, uneducated, with no future beyond the walls he built day after day. "Who were you talking to?" Frank pressed. "Personal matters, Mr. Williams." "In Japanese?" "What kind of personal matters are handled in Japanese?" Richard paused for a moment, looked at his boss, then returned to work without answering. Frank felt his blood boil. He wasn't used to being ignored, especially by an employee earning minimum wage. "I asked you a question, Richard, and I'd rather not answer, sir. If you'll excuse me, I need to finish this wall before lunch." The other workers watched with interest. It was the first time they'd seen Richard stand up to the boss. He had always been the quietest, the one who kept his head down, who never complained even when Frank humiliated him in front of everyone. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out as we're just starting. Now, back to the story. Frank returned to the makeshift office on site, but couldn't focus. He called his secretary and asked her to look into Richard Johnson's background. Maybe there was something in his file that had gone unnoticed. Half an hour later, Amanda walked in with a thin folder in her hands. "Mr. Williams, here's everything on Richard. Basic resume, only some elementary school, worked at several construction companies before coming here. Nothing special. Are you sure no mention of languages?" "None, sir. Why do you ask?" Frank recounted what he had witnessed. Amanda widened her eyes in surprise. "Japanese? Are you sure it was really Japanese?" "Absolutely. My ex-wife was of Japanese descent. I recognize the language. And it wasn't basic Japanese, Amanda. He was discussing something complex, technical." "Do you want me to investigate further?" "I do. Something isn't right here." Meanwhile, at the construction site, Richard ate his lunch quietly. His co-workers approached, curious. "Hey, Richard, gonna tell us the story?" Mike sat beside him. "Since when do you speak Japanese?" "Learned it a while ago." "But where? How?" Dave also came closer. "You never mentioned this." Richard chewed his rice and beans slowly, thoughtful. He had known these men for 3 years, shared sweat and exhaustion with them, but never his story. Maybe it was time for some truths to come out. "I lived in Japan for 15 years, he finally said. The men exchanged glances, shocked. 15 years? Doing what? Working. As a bricklayer. Richard smiled faintly, a sad smile. That didn't reach his eyes. Not exactly. Before they could ask more, the bell rang, signaling the end of lunch. Richard stood, wiped his hands on his uniform and went back to work. The others stayed there, processing the information. In the office, Frank made calls. Something about Richard deeply unsettled him. It wasn't just the Japanese. It was the way he spoke, his posture, the technical vocabulary. That wasn't learned in some basic course. The phone rang. It was Amanda. "Sir, I found something interesting. Remember Richard's full last name? Johnson, right? Johnson Tanaka. His full name is Richard Johnson Tanaka. He only uses Johnson on work documents." Frank felt a chill down his spine. Tanaka, a Japanese surname. "Keep digging," he ordered. The day passed tensely. Frank watched Richard work, noticing details that had previously gone unnoticed. The millimeter precision with which he laid each brick, the way he calculated angles without tools, how he guided the other bricklayers, always with practical solutions, to complex problems. How had he been so blind? At the end of the shift, Richard was putting away his tools when Frank approached again. "Richard, I need to talk to you, in my office." "I'd prefer it be right here, Mr. Williams. It's an order." "Then I'd rather be fired." Frank swallowed hard. In 3 years, he'd never seen Richard confront him like this. "I don't understand your attitude today." "My attitude is the same as always, sir. I work, I get paid, I go home. The difference is that today you found out I speak Japanese. Does that change anything?" "It changes everything. You lied on your resume." "I didn't mention I speak Japanese. Is that lying? Did you ask if I spoke other languages when you hired me?" Frank didn't answer. Obviously he hadn't asked. Why would he ask something like that to a bricklayer? "Listen here, Richard." "No, Mr. Williams, you listen." Richard took a step forward, and Frank instinctively stepped back. "For 3 years I've built your buildings, raised walls, laid foundations, worked in sun and rain. Was my work good or bad?" "It was adequate." "Adequate?" Richard laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Mr. Williams, in the last 3 years, none of my work has had issues, no cracks, no leaks, no rework. How many of your other bricklayers can say the same?" Frank didn't answer. It was true. Richard was impeccable in his work, but he'd always chalked it up to luck or chance. "Now, because you found out I speak Japanese, suddenly I deserve to be called to your office. Suddenly I'm worthy of your attention. That's exactly it." Richard grabbed his backpack. "See you tomorrow, Mr. Williams." That night, Frank couldn't sleep. He called a few contacts, asking for information about a certain Richard Tanaka. The answers he received left him even more puzzled. No one knew that name in the construction industry. The next day, Frank arrived early at the worksite. To his surprise, Richard was already there, mixing cement as he always did. "Good morning, Mr. Williams." "Richard, we need to talk seriously. If it's about yesterday, I apologize for my tone. It was disrespectful." "It's not about that." Frank took a deep breath. "Who are you, really?" Richard stopped mixing, looked at his boss, and then at the horizon where the sun was beginning to rise over New York City. "I'm Richard Johnson Tanaka, a bricklayer, 52 years old, married, 2 kids. That's all that matters." "No, it's not. You speak Japanese fluently. You have technical knowledge far beyond the ordinary. Why are you here doing this kind of work?" "Because I need to support my family. Isn't that why we all work?" "You could earn much more as an interpreter." "A translator." "I could," Richard agreed, "but I chose to do this." "Why?" Richard resumed mixing, silence stretching between them. When he finally spoke, his voice carried deep sorrow. "Mr. Williams, you're 45, right? You built this company from the ground up. I'm sure you're proud of what you've achieved." "Yes, but what does that have to do?" "Imagine losing everything. Imagine having to start over at 49 in a different country, with a family to feed and unable to use your previous qualifications. What would you do?" Frank fell silent. Richard continued, "You'd do whatever was necessary. You'd take any honest job that came your way. And that's what I did." "But why can't you use your qualifications? What happened in Japan?" Richard shook his head. That's a story I'd rather not tell. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to work." The day passed in uneasy tension. The other workers whispered among themselves, speculating about Richard. Frank stayed in his office, his mind racing with questions. Then Amanda rushed in, her face pale, a trembling paper in her hands. "Mr. Williams, you need to see this." "What is it?" "I got it through a contact at the Japanese embassy. Richard Tanaka was chief engineer at Yamada Construction, one of Japan's largest firms. He oversaw the construction of skyscrapers, bridges, billion-dollar projects." Frank snatched the paper from her. There, in black and white, was a photo of a younger Richard wearing a suit, standing beside Japanese executives. The caption read, "Engineer Richard Tanaka receives Excellence Award in Sustainable Construction." My God, Frank sank into his chair. "What is he doing working as a bricklayer on my site?" "There's more, sir. He left Japan 3 years ago. Exactly when he started working here. But there's no record of why he left. It's like he just disappeared." Frank looked out the window, watching Richard work. The man he had humiliated so many times, the man he had treated as inferior, was more qualified than he was. The irony was crushing. "Call him in. Now." "Sir, maybe it's better if—" "Now, Amanda." Minutes later, Richard entered the office, his uniform dusty, his face sweaty from work. "Sit down," Frank ordered, tossing the papers onto the desk. "Explain this." Richard glanced at the documents, his expression unreadable. "You had no right to dig into my past." "I have every right to know who works for me. Chief engineer at Yamada. Construction Excellence Awards? What the hell are you doing here?" Richard picked up the photo, his fingers tracing the faces frozen in time. "That was another life, Mr. Williams. Stop beating around the bush. I want the truth." "The truth?" Richard raised his eyes, and Frank saw deep pain in them. "The truth is, 3 years ago I had everything. Position, money, respect. And in a single night I lost it all. I had to choose between my career and my family. I chose my family." "What do you mean?" Richard stood up, walked to the window, watching the workers below. "My wife Jennifer was pregnant with our second child. She had serious complications, needed an experimental surgery only available in the United States. I dropped everything and rushed here, spent all our savings on her treatment. But afterward you could have gone back." "No." Richard shook his head. "Jennifer developed a chronic condition. She needs constant medical care, expensive medication, specialized treatment. In Japan, as foreigners, we wouldn't have coverage for that. Here, with Medicare and my basic health plan, I can keep her stable. But with your qualifications—" "My qualifications?" Richard laughed bitterly. "Mr. Williams, do you think it's easy to validate a foreign degree in the United States? Do you think at 49, after being out of the job market, anyone would hire me? While I struggled with bureaucracy, my family needed to eat." Frank fell silent, processing the information. "So you became a construction worker?" "I always knew how to build. I just had to learn to do with my hands what I once designed on a computer." Richard sat back down. "It's honest work, Mr. Williams. Pays the bills, keeps my wife alive, my kids in school. The call yesterday, it was from Yamada Construction. They reach out periodically, offering me a way back. Yesterday they offered a special project overseeing the construction of a hospital complex." Richard smiled sadly. "Ironic, isn't it? A hospital. And you turned it down?" "Like I always do. My place is here, with my family." Silence stretched between them. Frank felt the weight of 3 years of humiliation. Harsh words, undeserved contempt. How many times had he called Richard stupid? How many times had he held him up as an example of what not to be in life? "Richard, You don't need to say anything, Mr. Williams. Tomorrow I'll turn in my resignation." "What?" "No, that's not what I want. But it's what needs to happen." Richard stood up. "You'll never see me the same way again. You'll feel uncomfortable. Try to compensate, treat me differently. Our co-workers will notice, they'll talk. It's better if I find another place. Richard, please, good afternoon, Mr. Williams." Richard left, leaving Frank alone with the weight of his actions. Outside, the sun began to set over the bay construction site. painting the sky orange and red. That night Frank came home troubled. His wife Sarah noticed immediately. "What's wrong? Problems at the site?" Frank told her everything. Sarah listened in silence, her face growing more serious. "You humiliated that man for 3 years," she said when he finished. "And now you've found out he's worth more than you." "Sarah, it's the truth, Frank. You've always been arrogant with the workers, always thought you were better. And now you've discovered the man you despised the most is a genius." "What do I do?" "First, you apologize. A real apology. Not that corporate act you put on. Then you beg him to stay. He said he's turning in his resignation tomorrow. Then you'd better get there early." The next day, Frank was at the site by 5 a.m. To his surprise, Richard was already there alone inspecting the foundations of a new section. "Richard," the construction worker turned, startled. "Mr. Williams, what are you doing here so early?" Frank took a deep breath. He'd never been good at apologies, but he had to try. "I came to ask you not to quit." "My decision is made." "I was a fool," Frank said suddenly. "An arrogant, prejudiced fool. I treated you poorly, humiliated you, and I have no excuses for that." Richard stayed silent, waiting. "But now I understand. I understand the sacrifice you made, the strength you had to have. And I admire that. I admire you. Mr. Williams." "Frank. Call me Frank." He extended his hand. "Can we start over?" Richard looked at the outstretched hand for a long moment. Then, slowly, he shook it. "It's not that simple, Mr. Frank. 3 years don't disappear," with a handshake. "I know, but it's a start. Stay, Richard, please. I need to learn from you." "Learn what?" "How to lay bricks. How to be a better man, a better boss." Frank let go of his hand. "And maybe, if you allow it, we can put your real skills to use. Consulting, special projects, whatever you want. I just want to keep being a bricklayer." "Why?" Richard picked up a trowel, feeling its familiar weight in his hand. "Do you know the difference between designing and building, Frank? When you design, you imagine. When you build, you create. I spent 15 years imagining. Now I create. Every wall I raise is real, solid. I can touch it. I can see the fruit of my labor at the end of the day. But you could create so much more." "More?" Richard smiled. "Frank, I keep my family together. My wife is alive because of the choices I made. My kids have a father who's present. What could be greater than that?" Frank had no answer. Richard continued. "Besides, I like my co-workers. Mike, Dave, old George. They're good men, hard workers. I've learned more about humanity in these 3 years than in 15 in Japan. Then stay, but at least let me raise your pay. If you do it just because of my past, I'll refuse. What if I do it because you're the best bricklayer I've ever had?" Richard thought for a moment. "That I can accept." The two men stood there watching the sun rise over New York City. A fresh start, perhaps, or just the continuation of a story that still had much left to tell. In the weeks that followed, the dynamic at the construction site shifted subtly. Frank stopped the public humiliations, not just with Richard, but with everyone. The workers noticed, whispering among themselves. Richard kept to his routine, but now Frank discreetly consulted him on structural issues. The bricklayer's solutions were always simple, elegant, saving time and money. One day, Jennifer showed up at the site, bringing lunch for Richard. Frank watched from a distance, a beautiful woman but with the pallor of someone who'd been fighting illness for a long time. "That's her," Richard said, noticing Frank's gaze. "My reason for everything." "Does she know?" "About your past in Japan?" Of course she knows. Jennifer was with me there. She was a translator at the company. That's how we met." "And she's okay with it? You working here?" "Jennifer blames herself every day," Richard said quietly. "Thinks she ruined my career. Doesn't understand she saved my life." "How so?" "In Japan I was the job. I lived for the company, slept at the office, never saw my kids grow up. The money was good, the prestige even better, but I was dying inside. When she got sick, it was like the universe gave me a chance to choose what really mattered. Jennifer waved from afar. Richard waved back, his face lighting up. "Go have lunch with her," Frank said. "Take the rest of the day off." "You don't have to. It's an order," Frank smiled. "The first decent order I've given you in 3 years." Richard thanked him and went to meet his wife. Frank watched them walk away, hand in hand, and felt a pang of envy. When was the last time he'd taken an afternoon off to be with Sarah? That night Frank came home early. Sarah was in the kitchen, surprised. "Did something happen?" "Yes," he hugged her. "I'm learning what truly matters." Meanwhile, in Richard's modest home, the family was having dinner together. Jason, their 16-year-old eldest son, talked about school. Emma, their 8-year-old, showed a drawing she had made. "Dad, the teacher asked us to talk about our parents' jobs," Emma said. "I told her you build houses." "And what did she say?" "That it's a very important job. Without people like you, we wouldn't have anywhere to live." Richard smiled, ruffling his daughter's hair. "She's right. It is a very important job." Later, with the children in bed, Richard and Jennifer sat on the small porch. She rested her head on his shoulder. "Did the company call again today?" she asked. "How did you know?" "You get that distant look in your eyes when they call. It's nothing important." "Richard," Jennifer lifted her head, staring at him. "Sometimes I think you should accept. Go back to Japan, resume your career. Without you, without the kids, never. We could try, maybe find treatment there." "Jen, look at me." Richard cupped her face in his hands. "There's no building, no project, no job in the world worth more than you. Understand?" She began to cry. "I ruined your life." "You are my life. You, Jason, and Emma. The rest is just work." They held each other under the stars, the distant noise of the big city in the background. Somewhere, skyscrapers touched the clouds, bridges connected shores. Monumental buildings defied gravity. Richard had designed many of them, but there, in that simple little house with his family close by, he had built something far more important. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. The next morning, Richard arrived at the construction site and found unusual activity. Several executive cars were parked, and men in suits were walking around. "What's going on?" he asked Mike. "Not sure. They got here early. Frank's been in a meeting with them for an hour." Richard felt a chill down his spine. He knew what this kind of activity meant. When executives showed up like this, it usually signaled trouble. Audits, inspections, or worse, mass layoffs. He tried to focus on his work, but it was hard to ignore the men in suits pointing at structures, taking notes, snapping photos. Then one of them approached. He was a Japanese gentleman, around 60, with impeccably combed grey hair. "Mr. Richard?" he asked in Japanese. Richard froze. That voice, "Mr. Watanabe," he replied, disbelieving. It was Hiroshi Watanabe, his old mentor at Yamada Construction, the man who had trained him, who had believed in him when he was just a young American engineer trying to make a career in Japan. "It's been too long, my friend," Watanabe said in heavily accented English. "We've been looking for you for 3 years. How did you find me?" "Your boss, Mr. Frank, contacted us yesterday, said he had an exceptional employee who spoke Japanese. When he mentioned your name," Richard looked toward the office where Frank was. Through the window, he could see his boss watching the scene. "You shouldn't have come, Mr. Watanabe." "Mr. Richard, please, the whole company missed you. Your projects, your leadership, no one could replace you." "I have a new life now." Watanabe glanced around, taking in the modest construction site, Richard's dirty uniform, the simple tools. "This is no life for someone of your talent. It's the life I chose. But why? What happened? You disappeared without explanation, left projects unfinished." "My wife got sick, very sick. I had to return to the United States." "We could have helped. The company has international medical partnerships." "It wasn't just that, Mr. Watanabe." Richard lowered his voice. "I was losing my family. I worked 20 hours a day, didn't see my kids. My wife was alone in a foreign country. When she got sick, I realized I was wasting what truly mattered." Watanabe fell silent for a moment. I understand, but now? Is she better? Stable, but she needs constant care. Mr. Richard, I came here with an offer. The company wants you back, but we understand your situation. We're willing to open an office here in the United States with you as director, salary in yen, full benefits, international health insurance for the whole family. Richard felt his heart race. It was more than he'd ever dreamed, the solution to all his financial problems, the recognition he deserved. I need to think. Of course. Watanabe handed him a card. I'll be at the hotel until Friday. Please consider. Your project saved lives, Mr. Richard. The earthquake-resistant building you designed withstood the 2019 quake. 300 families survived because of you. Watanabe walked away, leaving Richard shaken. 300 families. He'd saved 300 families and hadn't even known. Frank appeared beside him. I'm sorry, I didn't know they'd come in person. I just wanted to verify their credentials. You had no right, Richard said, his voice trembling with restrained emotion. I know, I'm sorry. But Richard, this offer, it's my life, Frank. My choices. But think of your family, what you could give them. Richard turned sharply, facing his boss. I give them my presence. A father who comes home for dinner, who helps with homework, who's there when they need him. Do you have kids, Frank? No. Then you can't understand. Money comes and goes. Time with your children. Once it's gone forever. Richard picked up his tools and went back to work, but his hands shook. Watanabe's visit had reopened wounds he thought had healed. That night at home, Jennifer noticed his unease. What's wrong? You seem off. Richard told her about the visit, the offer. Jennifer listened silently, her face growing paler with each word. My God, an office in the United States, director. It's not important. How is it not important? Richard, it's everything you ever wanted. To use your skills. Here, close to family. Jen. No. She stood, tears in her eyes. You have to accept. It's the perfect opportunity. And go back to working 20 hours a day? Become the man who barely knew his own kids again? It'd be different now, would it? Richard stood too. You don't know the pressure, the expectations. Regional director means constant travel, endless meetings, impossible targets. But the money! We could afford the best doctors. Emma could go to the best schools. Jason could study. Abroad. And I could lose you all over again. It's not worth it, Jen. Jennifer began to sob uncontrollably. Richard tried to hold her, but she pulled away. You're being selfish. Selfish? I gave up everything for you. I never asked for that, she shouted. I never asked you to throw your career away. You made that choice alone, and now you use it against me every day. The silence that followed was devastating. In 15 years of marriage, it was the first time Jennifer had put into words what Richard always feared, that she resented his sacrifice. Jen, I need to be alone, she said, walking to the bedroom. Richard stood in the living room, stunned. Emma appeared in the hallway, frightened. Dad, why is Mom crying? Go back to bed, sweetheart, it's okay. Were you fighting? No, honey, just talking loud. Go to sleep. Emma obeyed, but Richard saw the worry in her eyes. He sat on the couch, head in his hands. Maybe Jennifer was right. Perhaps he was being selfish, disguising his fear of failing again as nobility. In the next room, Jason had also heard the argument. At 16, he understood more than his parents realized. He knew about his father's past in Japan, about the sacrifices, about his mother's illness. And now, for the first time, he saw the cracks in the foundation that had always seemed solid. The next morning, the atmosphere in the house was tense. Jennifer prepared breakfast in silence, avoiding Richard's gaze. The children noticed and ate quickly, eager to escape the heavy mood. At work, Richard couldn't focus. He nearly dropped a bucket of cement from the 3rd floor, only avoiding an accident because Mike shouted in time. Richard, what's going on with you? Old George asked. You've been in La La Land since yesterday. Problems at home. Just want to talk. Richard looked at the old foreman. George was 65 and had worked in construction since he was 14. If anyone understood tough choices, it was him. George, have you ever regretted a choice in life? Plenty. But you know the worst, regretting the chances I didn't take. George lit a cigarette. I had a shot at being an engineer, 40 years ago. A company offered to pay for my degree. And you didn't take it? My mother got sick, needed to work to take care of her. George took a drag. She died 2 years later. I was left, no mother, no diploma. Do you regret it? Every day. Not for caring for her, but for not trying to do both. Thought I had to pick one or the other. Maybe I could have done it differently. Richard absorbed the words. Was he doing the same thing, creating a false choice between family and career? At lunch, Frank called him over. Richard, your Japanese friend called. Reminded you the offer expires Friday. Thanks for the heads up. Richard, can I give you some advice? Go ahead, take it. Not for the money, not for the prestige. Take it because you're too talented to waste here. I'm not being wasted. I'm building. You're surviving. It's different. Frank sat down. Know why I built this company? Because my father told me I'd never amount to anything. Spent 20 years proving him wrong. And you know what I learned? In the end, he died before I could prove a damn thing. What does that have to do with me? You don't have to prove anything to anyone, Richard. Not that you're humble, not that you're a devoted father. Your family knows who you are. The question is, are you being the best version of yourself? Richard didn't answer. The question echoed in his mind as he returned to work. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. One of the buildings under construction across town, by a rival company, showed severe structural cracks. The site was shut down, families evacuated. The news spread fast in the construction world. You see Thompson Construction's building, Mike commented. Heard they'll have to demolish the whole thing. Calculation error, Dave said. Skimped on concrete, and this is what happens. Richard examined photos on someone's phone. His trained mind immediately spotted the issue. Undersized beams, improper load distribution, a basic mistake any competent engineer should have caught. This will cost lives, he murmured. How so? They evacuated everyone. Mike said. I'm not talking about physical deaths. I mean the families who lost their homes, the life savings poured into apartments now worthless. That kills too, just slowly. The men fell silent. Richard kept studying the photos, his mind calculating, analyzing. If he'd been supervising that project, the mistake never would have slipped through. How many buildings across the United States had similar problems just waiting to happen? Watanabe was right. His design saved lives. It wasn't just about building. It was about building right, safe, and sustainable. And he had that knowledge locked away, wasted on jobs any competent bricklayer could do. When he got home that night, he found Jennifer on the porch, watching the sunset. She had been crying. Her eyes were still red. I'm sorry for what I said yesterday. She spoke without looking at him. It was cruel and unfair. No, you were right. Richard sat beside her. I've been using my sacrifice as a shield, an excuse not to take risks again. What are you talking about? I'm scared, Jen, scared to accept the offer and become the man I used to be, scared of losing you all. Oh, Richard, she took his hand. You'll never lose us, not anymore. We've both changed, grown. We're not that lost young couple in Japan anymore. But what if... No what ifs. Jennifer turned to face him. Do you trust me with my life? Then trust me when I say you can do this. You can be the brilliant engineer and the present father. You don't have to choose. How can you be so sure? Because for the last 3 years, you've proven you'd do anything for this family. You've worked under scorching sun, endured humiliation, sacrificed your pride. A man who can do that can balance a career and a family. Richard felt his eyes well up. Jennifer continued. And there's one more thing. Emma asked me today why you work so hard if you're so smart. I didn't know what to say. What does that have to do with anything? Our kids need to see you shine, Richard. They need to understand that intelligence and hard work go hand in hand, that there's no shame in using your talents to the fullest. Jason looks down on me for being a bricklayer. Jason is 16 and confused. He loves you but doesn't understand your choices. Maybe it's time to show him you can be both. the father he loves and the professional he can admire. They sat in silence, holding hands, watching the first stars appear in the sky. "I'll call Watanabe tomorrow," Richard finally said. "Are you sure?" "No. But you're right. I have to try. For us, for the kids, and for me." Jennifer rested her head on his shoulder. "I love you, you know." "I know. That's why I do all this." "No. Do it for yourself, too. You deserve it." The next day, Richard called Watanabe during his lunch break. The conversation was in Japanese, watched curiously by his co-workers. "Mr. Richard, I'm glad you called. Mr. Watanabe, about the offer." "Yes? I have some conditions. I'm listening. First, fixed working hours. I start at 8, leave at 6. No exceptions, except real emergencies. That's unusual for a regional director. Non-negotiable. Second, all travel must be scheduled at least 2 weeks in advance. Third, I want autonomy to hire my team locally. Anything else? Yes, I want to start slow, a 3-month adjustment period, with the option for reassessment by both sides." Watanabe was silent for a moment. "You've changed, Mr. Richard. I've learned what really matters. I understand I'll present your conditions to the board, but I believe they'll agree. You're worth these concessions." When Richard hung up, he noticed all his co-workers staring at him. "So it's true?" Mike asked. "You're leaving us?" "I don't know yet. Maybe." Man, Richard. Right when Frank stopped being a jerk. "That's life, Mike. Things change." "But you're not really just a bricklayer, are you?" Dave asked. "I mean, you are, but you're also something else." "I'm many things. Bricklayer is one of them, and I'm proud of it." Old George walked over and put a hand on Richard's shoulder. "Go for it, kid. Don't make my mistake." The rest of the day passed in a haze. Richard worked mechanically, his mind processing the imminent change. Would he be able to balance everything? To keep his promises to the family while meeting the demands of an executive role? That evening, during dinner, he told the children about the possibility. "Is Dad going to be an engineer again?" Emma asked, her eyes shining. "Maybe, sweetheart." "Cool, my friends are going to be so impressed." Jason stayed quiet, pushing his food around. "What about you, Jason? What do you think?" Richard asked. "Whatever," the teenager muttered. "Jason," Jennifer scolded. "No, let him speak," Richard said. "What is it, son?" Jason looked up and Richard saw anger in his eyes. "Now you decide to be an engineer, after 3 years embarrassing me at school? Embarrassing you? You know how many times I got made fun of because my dad's a construction worker, how many jokes I had to hear, and now out of nowhere you can be an engineer again?" "Jason, I never stopped being an engineer. I was just doing another job." "Why?" The boy's voice cracked. "Why did you choose to be a construction worker?" Richard glanced at Jennifer, who nodded slightly. "Because your mum was very sick, and we needed to come back to the United States. The treatment used up all our savings. I had to work right away, and construction was what came up. But after that, why did you keep doing it?" Because I was scared. Scared of going back to that life, of losing you all again. Losing us. In Japan, I worked so much I barely saw you. You were 13 and I missed your first judo tournament, remember? I promised I'd be there and skipped it for a meeting." Jason looked down. He remembered. It had been one of the worst days of his life. "When we came back to the United States, I promised myself it would be different, that I'd be present, and I went to the opposite extreme. I completely erased myself." "Dad, your father is trying to fix that now," Jennifer said. "Find a balance, and we're going to support him, right?" Jason nodded, his eyes wet. "I'm sorry, Dad, for what I said." "No need to apologize. You have every right to be angry. I made choices that affected the whole family without consulting anyone. But you did it for us. I did what I thought was best at the time. Doesn't mean it was the right choice." After dinner, Richard found Jason on the porch. "Mind if I sit?" "Sure." They stayed quiet for a moment, watching the street. "You know, when I was your age, my dad was a mechanic," Richard said. "I was embarrassed. I wanted him to be a doctor, a lawyer, anything but a mechanic." "Really?" "Yeah. It took me years to realize it doesn't matter what you do, but how you do it. My dad was the best mechanic in town. People came from far away for him to fix their cars." Was he upset when you became an engineer? He was proud, said everyone builds their own path. He built with engines, I build with buildings. And now you're going to go back to building. Big buildings? Maybe, but you know what I learned being a construction worker. What? That no construction is small. Every wall, every foundation, every brick matters. The simplest house holds dreams as big as the tallest skyscraper. Jason smiled. Dad, if you go back to being an engineer, will you have time for me? I'll make time, I promise. And this time, I'll keep it. On Friday, Watanabe called with the company's answer. They accepted all your conditions, Mr. Richard. When can you start? Richard took a deep breath. I need to give a month's notice at my current construction company. It wouldn't be right to leave without preparing someone to take my place. A month? Mr. Richard, we have urgent projects. Mr. Watanabe, if I'm going to run the American office, I need to start the right way, by honoring my previous commitments. I understand, I respect that. 1 month, then. When Richard told Frank, his boss stayed silent for a long moment. I pushed for this, didn't I? With my investigation, I brought them to you. Maybe, or maybe it was inevitable. The past always catches up with us. I'll miss you. More than that, I'll miss the lesson you taught me. What lesson? That greatness isn't in the title, but in the character. Frank extended his hand. First, it was an honor having you here, even if it took me a while to realize that. The news spread quickly through the construction site. The crew was torn between the sadness of losing a friend and the joy of seeing him achieve what he deserved. I always knew you were special, Mike said. There was something different in how you looked at structures, like you could see beyond the concrete. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. In Richard's last month at the construction company, something extraordinary happened. He began training Mike to take his place, sharing not just construction techniques, but engineering principles he'd learned over the years. You have talent, Mike, Richard said while teaching him about load distribution. Have you ever thought about studying engineering? At 35? With a family to support? Impossible. So it's not difficult, not impossible. There are night classes, scholarships. You really think I could do it? I've seen you solve structural problems instinctively that trained engineers would get wrong. Yes, you could. The seed was planted. Mike began researching, dreaming of possibilities he'd never considered. Meanwhile, Richard started preparing his transition. Yamada Construction rented a modern office in downtown New York City, and he split his time between the site and setting up the new space. One afternoon, Jennifer showed up at the future office with a surprise lunch. Wow, she said, looking around. It's impressive. Terrifying, you mean? A bit of both. She sat in the chair, that would be his. How do you feel? Like I'm wearing clothes I haven't worn in years. They fit, but they feel strange. You'll adjust. Jennifer opened the lunchboxes. I brought your favorite food. Chili, here in this fancy office. To remember where we came from, she smiled, and where we're going. They ate together, talking about the future. Richard showed her the projects he'd oversee. Hospitals, schools, affordable housing with seismic technology adapted for the United States. These aren't just buildings, he explained. This is social infrastructure. Each project can change entire communities. I'm proud of you, Jennifer said, but more importantly, are you proud of yourself? Richard thought for a moment. I'm learning to be. At the site, the last days were emotional. Frank organized a farewell barbecue, gathering all the workers. It was the first time the boss socialized as an equal with the employees. Old George gave a speech that moved everyone. Richard taught us that a man isn't measured by his title, but by the respect he earns. He was a bricklayer among us, but he was always a giant in character. He'll be missed, but he leaves an example behind. The men applauded. Richard, embarrassed, thanked them. You all taught me more than you know, he said. Each of you builds the United States every day, brick by brick. Never forget the value of what you do. Dave approached with a wrapped gift. We all pitched in. It's something to remember us by. Richard opened it. Inside was a gold-plated trowel with an inscription. To the engineer who never forgot how to be a bricklayer. "I'll keep this forever," he said, his voice thick with emotion. On his last day, Richard arrived early as always. He wanted to finish the wall he was building, leaving everything ready for Mike to take over. He worked in silence until he noticed. Someone nearby. It was Frank. "I came to help," the boss said, picking up a trowel. "Do you know how to use this? I'll learn. Will you teach me?" The two worked side by side, Richard guiding Frank through the basic movements. It was a role reversal that would have been unthinkable 3 months ago. "You know, Richard, you changed me," Frank said as he tried to align a brick. "You changed this company. We won't be the same without you." "You'll be better. The change has already begun." "How can you be sure?" "Because you're here getting your hands dirty learning. A boss who understands his workers' jobs is a true leader." At 5 in the afternoon, Richard put away his tools for the last time. His co-workers formed a line to say goodbye, each shaking his hand and wishing him success. Mike was the last. "I'll miss you, brother. I'll miss you too. But I'll be around." "And Mike, about that engineering course, I already signed up for the entrance exam." Richard smiled widely. "That's the best news you could have given me." He left the construction site carrying his personal toolbox. At the gate, he turned for one last look. 3 years of his life. 3 years many would consider wasted. But Richard knew better. They were 3 years of learning, humility, and discovery. At home, his family was waiting with a small celebration. Emma had made a sign. "Congratulations, Dad the engineer." Jason had prepared a speech about pride and perseverance. Jennifer had tears in her eyes. "Ready for the new beginning?" she asked. "With you by my side?" "Always." The following. Monday, Richard wore a suit for the first time in 3 years. He looked at himself in the mirror, adjusting his tie. The man staring back was different from the one who had worn a suit in Japan. More mature, wiser, more complete. "You look handsome," Jennifer said, smoothing his lapel. "I'm nervous." "That's normal, but remember, you don't have to prove anything to anyone. Just be yourself." At the office, the Japanese team was waiting. New faces, some familiar. Mr. Watanabe made the introductions. "This is Richard Tanaka, our new regional director. He brings a unique combination of international technical experience and deep knowledge of American realities." Richard spoke first in Japanese, then in English. "Thank you for your trust. Our goal here isn't just to build structures, but to build a future. Every project will be designed with the local reality in mind, respecting American culture and needs." The first meeting was about the hospital project. Richard reviewed the blueprints and immediately spotted issues. "This was designed for Tokyo, not New York City," he said. "We need to adapt. The ventilation system won't work with our humidity, and the anti-seismic structure is excessive for our geological conditions. But the Japanese standards," a young engineer began, "are excellent for Japan. Here, we need American-Japanese standards, the best of both worlds, the best of..." Over the following weeks, he restructured projects, hired local staff, and established partnerships. True to his word, he left the office at 6 p.m. sharp, ignoring the surprised looks from his Japanese colleagues. At home, he kept up the family routine, dinners together, helping with homework, conversations on the porch. Emma loved telling her school about her dad's new job. Jason, inspired, improved his grades in math and physics. A month later, Richard got an unexpected call. "Richard, it's Mike. I passed the entrance exam." "Congratulations, I knew you could do it. It's because of you. You showed me it was possible." "Oh, and there's more. Frank is paying half the tuition, said it's an investment in the company's future." Richard smiled. The ripples of change kept spreading. At the office, the projects moved forward. The hospital would be the first of many, combining Japanese technology with American labor and materials. Richard insisted on hiring local workers, training them in advanced techniques. During a visit to the hospital site, he ran into some former colleagues from the construction site. Dr. Richard," Dave waved. "Just Richard." "Dave, how are things?" "Much better. Frank has completely changed. He treats us with respect now, and Mike is studying, did you know?" "Yes, I heard." "What about you all? Any plans?" We're thinking about it. If Mike can do it, who knows? Maybe we can too. More seeds planted. 6 months later, the first hospital was inaugurated. Richard made sure to invite all his former colleagues from the construction site. They came dressed in their best clothes, proud to see their friend shine. During the ceremony, Richard was called to speak. "This hospital," he began, "was built by many hands. Japanese hands that brought technology, American hands that know our soil, our climate, our people. But above all, it was built by hard-working hands, whether engineers or laborers, because in the end we all build the same dream, a better place to live." Frank was in the audience, next to Mike and other workers. When his eyes met Richard's, he gave a discreet nod. Mutual respect born from humility and recognition had replaced the old empty hierarchy. After the ceremony, Watanabe approached. "Mr. Tanaka, the board is impressed. In 6 months, you've established a model they want to replicate in other countries." "It's the American way," Richard replied. "Adaptability, creativity, warmth. Mix that with Japanese discipline and you get something special." "And your family? How are they adjusting to the change?" Richard looked over to where Jennifer was chatting animatedly with other wives. Emma was playing with children, and Jason was taking pictures of the building. "We've never been better." It was true. The balance that once seemed impossible was working. It wasn't perfect. There were tough days, meetings that ran late, occasional trips. But Richard had learned to set boundaries, delegate, and trust his team. A year later, during a family dinner, Jason made an announcement. "I've decided what I want to study." "What?" Jennifer asked. "Civil engineering, like Dad." Richard nearly choked on his food. "Are you sure? I don't want you to choose this just because of me. It's not just because of you. It's because I've seen what engineering can do. It's not just about buildings. It's about changing lives. I want to be part of that. And I want to be a doctor," Emma announced, "to take care of people like they took care of Mom." Jennifer began to cry. Richard held her hand. "We're raising good kids," she whispered. "We're raising present kids," he corrected. "The rest, they'll achieve on their own." 2 years passed. Richard's company flourished, becoming a leader in sustainable and socially responsible construction. Mike graduated and was hired as a junior engineer. Dave and others followed his example, pursuing formal education. Frank transformed his construction company, implementing worker-friendly policies inspired by what he'd learned. The business grew, attracting talent that once wouldn't have considered working there. During a routine site visit, Richard noticed a young laborer working. Something about the precision of his movements caught his attention. "Good work," he praised. "Thank you, sir. I learned from the best." "From whom?" "My uncle, Mike. He says he learned from an engineer who was a laborer. Or was it a laborer who became an engineer?" The young man laughed. "He tells that story so much I've lost track." Richard smiled. The story lived on, passed down, reshaped with each telling but keeping its essence. Dignity in work, mutual respect, the certainty that every honest effort builds not just structures, but destinies. That evening at home, Richard found Jennifer on the porch, stargazing as they had since the hard times. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, sitting beside her. "How life takes its turns. 5 years ago, you'd come home covered in cement, exhausted, worried about bills. Today I come home clean, less physically tired, but still worried," he finished. "Some things never change. The worries have changed. True, before it was about paying the bills. Now it's about making a difference. You've always made a difference, Richard. The scale just changed." They fell silent, holding hands. "You know what makes me proudest?" Jennifer said. "What?" "That you never lost your humility. You're still the same man I met 20 years ago." "I'm not the same. I'm better. You made me better." "We made each other better. Together." Emma appeared at the door, already in her pajamas. "Dad, can you help me with my science project?" "Of course, sweetheart. What's it about?" "Structures and forces. My teacher said you're an expert." Richard stood up, kissed Jennifer, and followed his daughter. On the way, he passed Jason's room where he was studying technical drawing. "Need any help?" Maybe later. I'm trying to figure it out on my own first. Good strategy. I'll be in the living room if you need me." As he explained basic physics concepts to Emma, Richard reflected on his journey. 5 years. Earlier, he'd been a successful engineer who barely knew his own children, then a laborer carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Now he was both and neither, simply Richard, father, husband, professional man. The phone rang. It was Frank. "Richard, sorry to call so late. It's about Mike." "What happened?" "Nothing bad. The opposite. He designed a solution. For Building C's foundation issue that's brilliant. It saves 30% on materials without losing strength. I always knew he had talent. You saw what no one else did. Thank you for that. For everything." "Frank, can I ask you something?" "Sure. Are you happier now?" There was a pause. "Yes, much happier. And you?" "Me too. I think I finally realized success isn't about the height of the buildings we construct, but the strength of the foundations we leave behind." Getting philosophical tonight, huh? Must be the age or the wisdom, or both. Good night, Richard. "Good night, Frank." He hung up and returned to helping Emma. Jennifer passed through the living room, heading to make tea. Jason appeared with a question. The house was alive, full of movement and purpose. Outside, New York City pulsed with lights and sounds. Somewhere in the city, buildings designed by Richard sheltered families, hospitals saved lives, schools educated future generations. But here, in this simple home, was his greatest construction. A family united, built on love and mutual respect. The laborer who spoke Japanese had found his balance, between Japan and the United States, between past and present, between ambition and family. He'd discovered he didn't have to choose. He could be a bridge, connecting worlds, cultures, dreams. The next day would bring new challenges, projects to approve, teams to lead, decisions to make, but there would also be family breakfasts, laughter, hugs, the certainty of being exactly where he should be. Richard Johnson Tanaka, engineer and laborer, had built many things in his life. But his masterpiece, he realized as Emma finally grasped the concept of force distribution, wasn't made of concrete and steel. It was made of moments like these, simple and precious, forming the unshakable structure of a meaningful life. 3 years later, on a sunny Saturday morning, Richard woke to the sound of hammers and voices in the backyard. Curious, he got up and found a scene that moved him deeply. Jason, now in his second year of engineering, was leading a group of classmates in building a toy house for a local orphanage. Mike was there, guiding the young men. Dave had brought materials. Even Frank showed up, clumsily trying to hammer a board. "What's all this?" Richard asked Jennifer, who was photographing everything. "Jason's project. He organized a volunteer group in college to build recreational spaces in underprivileged institutions. They call it Hands Building Dreams." Richard felt his eyes well up. Jason saw him and waved. "Dad, come help. I need technical advice here." As he walked toward his son, Richard passed by Emma, now 14, who was coordinating the painting with other teenagers. "Watch out for the paint, Dad," she warned. "That suit must have cost a fortune." "I'm not wearing a suit, sweetheart. I know, I was joking," she smiled. "But it's weird seeing you in a t-shirt on a Saturday. Does that mean I spend too much time in suits?" "No more than necessary. You learned balance, remember?" His daughter's wisdom surprised him. Yes, he had learned. He spent the morning working with Jason and the others, his hands recalling the familiar weight of tools. He taught techniques, corrected mistakes, but mostly watched how the lessons he'd planted had taken root. Mike, now a trained engineer working for an ethical construction company, patiently guided the young volunteers. Frank, CEO of a transformed business, got his hands dirty without hesitation. Dave, who had started a technical course, demonstrated skills he'd developed over the years. "It's beautiful to see this," Mr. Watanabe said, appearing beside Richard. "Mr. Watanabe, what are you doing here?" "Jason invited me. He said the project needed international support." The Japanese man smiled. "The company will donate materials to build 10 small houses. You didn't have to." "Mr. Richard, you taught us that building goes beyond raising structures. It's about building community, future, hope. It's an honor to participate." During lunch, an impromptu barbecue in the backyard. Richard observed the unlikely mix of people. Japanese executives chatting with American construction workers, engineering students learning from seasoned laborers, his family at the center of it all, connecting worlds. Frank approached with 2 beers. "Remember when we first met?" he asked. "Hard to forget, you called me incompetent on day 1. I was an idiot." Frank took a sip. "But you know what's ironic? You could have crushed me any time, could have bought my company with the salary you earned in Japan. But then I wouldn't have learned what I did." "What?" "That humility isn't about belittling yourself. It's about understanding your place in the world without needing to prove anything. You've changed so many lives, Richard. Mine, Mike's, so many others. We all change each other. That's how it works." Jason walked over, sweaty and happy. "Dad, the kids from the orphanage are coming next week to see the finished house. Can you be there?" "Of course, wouldn't miss it for the world." "Cool, and Dad, thank you." "For what?" "For showing me there are many ways to build. With your hands, your mind, your heart." Jason hugged his father. "Love you, old man." Richard couldn't reply, emotion tightening his throat. Jason walked away, returning to work, leaving his father with an overflowing heart. Emma appeared, her face smudged with paint. "Dad, Mom's calling you, something about an important call." Richard found Jennifer in the living room, phone in hand. "It's Columbia University. They want you to give a lecture on sustainable building and social responsibility." "Me? Give a lecture?" "Professor Richard Tanaka has a nice ring to it," she teased. "I'm not a professor, aren't you?" Jennifer gestured to the backyard. "What do you call that then?" Richard looked through the window. Dozens of people working together, learning, teaching, building something greater than just a little house. "You're right, as always." "I know." She kissed him. "Now get back out there. Your son is building the future and needs his dad nearby." Richard returned to the backyard, the sun warming his face. He grabbed a shovel and joined the work, his calloused hands finding their familiar rhythm. There, between laughter and sweat, among friends who had been bosses and subordinates, among cultures that met and enriched each other, Richard understood that his journey had reached an unexpected and perfect place. He was no longer the Japanese engineer nor the American laborer. He was simply a man who had chosen to build bridges between worlds, between people, between dreams and reality. The little house was taking shape, colorful and joyful, but what was truly being built there was legacy, community, future. Every nail, every plank, every brushstroke was a declaration that dignified work, whatever it may be, builds more than structures. It builds lives. 5 years later, Richard was in his office reviewing blueprints when Amanda, now his executive assistant, hurried in. "Richard, you need to see this." She turned on the television. A news segment showed the inauguration of a housing complex in one of the most underserved outskirts of New York City. The reporter interviewed emotional residents. "It's a dream come true," said an elderly woman. "A decent home with good structure in a place that was once forgotten." The camera panned over the complex, solid yet welcoming buildings, green spaces, communal areas. Richard immediately recognized the design. It was one of the projects he had supervised, blending Japanese space optimization techniques with the American need for shared living spaces. But what caught his attention was the name of the complex. Building Hands Residences. "Jason," he murmured. "There's more," Amanda said. "Look who's overseeing the project." The camera focused on the lead engineer. It was Mike, now with graying hair, explaining the construction techniques being used. "We've learned that quality construction isn't a privilege for the few," Mike said. "Every American deserves to live with dignity. That's what my mentor always said. No construction is small when it shelters big dreams." Richard had to sit down. The emotion was overwhelming. The phone rang. It was Jason. "Dad, did you see?" "I did, son." I'm speechless. "It was your idea, Dad. Remember when you said the biggest challenge in American engineering was democratizing quality? I took it seriously. Jason now worked for a housing nonprofit, using his skills to design affordable yet dignified homes. And there's more," Jason continued. "Emma wants to talk to you. Dad? Emma's voice, now a medical student, was excited. I did it. I got accepted into the family medicine residency program. Congratulations, sweetheart. I'll be working in underserved communities, Dad, bringing healthcare where it's needed most. Like you always said, building isn't just about buildings. I'm so proud. I'm the proud one, Dad, to be your daughter. I love you. He hung up and sat there taking it all in. His children had taken his lessons and turned them into something even greater. Mr. Watanabe entered the office. Mr. Richard, I came to say goodbye. Goodbye. I'm returning to Japan, retirement. The old friend smiled. But first, I wanted to thank you. Thank me for what? For teaching me that success has many faces. In Japan, I measured success by numbers, goals, profits. You showed me that success is Mike going from construction worker to engineer. It's Frank transforming his company. It's your children changing the world. It's the living legacy we've built. The two embraced, moved. Take care, my friend, Richard said. You too, and Mr. Richard, keep building bridges. After Mr. Watanabe left, Richard walked to the window. New York City stretched before him, a city of contrasts where his own life had been transformed. The phone rang again. It was Jennifer. Honey, are you coming home for lunch today? I was thinking of working straight through. Richard Johnson Tanaka, it's 12:30 on a Friday, you promised. He smiled. Some promises were worth more than any project. I'm on my way. On his way home, he passed by the old construction site where he had once worked as a bricklayer. It was unrecognizable now. A beautiful residential building stood in its place. He stopped the car and got out. At the guard booth, an older man watched him approach. Can I help you? Just reminiscing. I worked here many years ago. In the building? On its construction. I was a bricklayer. The security guard glanced at the executive car, at Richard's fine clothes, clearly confused. Tough times? He asked, sympathetically. No, Richard smiled. Necessary times. He returned to the car and drove home. Jennifer was waiting with a special lunch, chili, his favorite. Any news today? She asked as they ate. Richard told her about the housing complex, about their children's achievements, about Watanabe's farewell. You're emotional, she observed. It's just, sometimes I stop to think about the journey. If I hadn't lost everything, in Japan, if you hadn't gotten sick, if I hadn't become a bricklayer, you wouldn't be who you are today. Exactly. The worst things that happened turned into the best. They weren't the worst things, Jennifer corrected. They were challenges, and we faced them together. After lunch, they sat on the porch, the same ritual they'd shared for years, the same comfort in each other's presence. Richard, I need to tell you something, Jennifer said. What? The doctors said I'm cured completely. No more intensive treatment needed. Richard stared at her, processing. But that's wonderful. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I was afraid. Afraid of what? That you'd want to go back to Japan now that you don't have to stay here for my sake. Richard silenced her with a kiss. Jen, I haven't been here out of obligation for a long time. I'm here because it's where we belong, where we built our life, where our kids grew up, where we made a difference. Are you sure? Absolutely. Japan gave me technical knowledge. The United States taught me what that knowledge is for. I wouldn't trade that for anything. They held each other, watching the afternoon sun filter through the backyard trees. Richard's phone buzzed. A message from Mike with a photo. Him. And his team at the construction site, all smiling, giving a thumbs up. Today we laid the last brick of the residences. Every wall was built with your teaching in mind. Build with purpose. Thank you for everything, Master. Soon after, a message from Frank arrived. Richard, we just won the award for the most humane company in the industry. 10 years ago, I wouldn't even have known what that meant. Thank you for opening my eyes. Then an unexpected call. It was old George, the former foreman. Richard, it's me, George. George, it's been so long. How are you? Retired, but well. I called because my grandson got into college. Engineering. Said he was inspired by the story of a bricklayer who became an engineer. Or was it an engineer who became a bricklayer? Richard laughed. Both, George. Both. Well, I wanted to thank you. for showing it's never too late to dream. When he hung up, Jennifer looked at him fondly. Your phone won't stop. It's Friday, the day people reflect on the week, on life. And you? What do you reflect on? Richard thought for a long moment. That every choice leads us somewhere. Some seem to take us backward, but they're really preparing us for bigger leaps. I went to Japan seeking success and found competence. I returned to the United States fleeing failure and found purpose. And now? Now I build. Not just buildings, but possibilities. Not just structures, but futures. The sun began to set, painting the sky orange and pink. The same sky Richard had seen so many times from the construction site, tired and covered in cement. The same sky he'd seen from his office in Japan, ambitious and lonely. The same sky as now, full and fulfilled. That evening, the family gathered for dinner. Jason brought his girlfriend, an architect who shared his vision for social building. Emma arrived straight from the hospital, still in her scrubs, glowing from her first experiences in residency. Dad, Emma said during dinner, today I treated a lady who lives in one of the buildings you built. She said it's the first time in her life she's had a home where water doesn't leak in when it rains. It might seem small, Jason added, but it means everything to someone who's never had it. That's why we do what we do, Richard said. Every wall we raise is dignity built. Speaking of building, Jason cleared his throat nervously, Emily and I have some news. Everyone turned to the couple. We're getting married, Emily announced, showing off her ring. The table erupted. In celebration. Jennifer cried. Emma jumped up to hug her brother. Richard shook his son's hand before pulling him into an embrace. And there's more, Jason continued. We want the wedding to be at the Building Hands residences, with everyone who helped build it, the residents, the workers, everyone. At the construction site, Jennifer asked, surprised. It won't be a construction site by then, Mum. It'll be home to hundreds of families. What better place to celebrate a union? Richard felt his chest swell with pride. His son understood. The best constructions are the ones that bring people together. Months later, on the wedding day, the Building Hands residences had been transformed. Flowers adorned the balconies, music filled the air, and families celebrated together. Richard watched the scene from the top of one of the buildings. Beside him stood Frank, Mike, Dave, Old George, and so many others who had been part of the journey. Who would have thought, Frank remarked, that the construction site where we first met would lead to this? Every place has its destiny, Richard replied. Some become buildings, others become homes. The best become communities. On the makeshift dance floor, Jason danced with Emily. Emma took photos with the residents. Jennifer coordinated the event with her usual efficiency. Mike approached. Richard, the residents prepared something. A group stepped onto the makeshift stage, families who lived in the residences, workers who had helped build it, people whose lives had been touched in some way. A girl around 10 years old took the microphone. We want to thank Mr. Jason and Mrs. Emily for this beautiful celebration, but we also want to thank Mr. Richard, who not everyone knows, but who built so much. More than our homes. He built hope. They began singing a song about home, about belonging, about building together. Richard couldn't hold back his tears. Mr. Tanaka, who had come from Japan just for the wedding, placed a hand on his shoulder. Mr. Tanaka, this is your true legacy. Not the buildings, but the smiles. Not the structures, but the lives changed. The celebration lasted well into the night. At some point, Richard found himself sitting on a low wall, taking it all in. An older man in simple clothes approached. Excuse me, are you Richard? I am. Do we know each other? Not personally, but you know me. I live in apartment 302, Block E. B, you designed it. I've designed a lot of apartments, but ours is special. You added an extra window in the kids' room. Said it was for more light. My daughter has depression, sir. That light saved her life. Every morning she wakes up with the sun on her face and smiles, all because of an extra window you fought to include, even when it cost more. The man shook Richard's hand and walked away, leaving him speechless. That was it. Every decision, every choice, every brick laid with purpose created ripples he could never fully measure. Jason appeared, looking for his father. Dad, It's time for the toast. Richard stood, straightened his jacket, and walked to the center of the celebration. He took the microphone, looking at the crowd of faces. Some he'd known for decades, others new, all part of the same story. When Jason told me he wanted to get married here, I'll admit I was surprised. But now I understand. This place represents everything we've learned together. That building is a collective act. No one builds anything alone. He paused. His eyes met Jennifer's. Many years ago, I had to choose between career and family. I thought they were opposite paths. It took me time to realize they're beams of the same structure. One supports the other. He looked at Mike, Frank, Dave, all his companions on this journey. I learned it doesn't matter if you design or build, if you wear a hard hat or a tie. What matters is building with integrity, with purpose, with love. He raised his glass. To Jason and Emily, may they build a life as solid as the foundations we've learned to make. To the friends here today, who taught me that the best constructions are made of people, not concrete. And to all of us, dream builders, may we keep raising bridges where others see walls. Cheers, everyone shouted. The music started again. Richard danced with Jennifer, then with Emma, then with Emily. He danced with elderly residents who insisted, with children who stepped on his feet. It was dawn when the party finally ended. Richard and Jennifer were the last to leave, helping turn off the lights. It was perfect, she said. It was real, he corrected. Better than perfect. They walked through the empty residential complex, their footsteps echoing. Richard stopped in front of a wall, touched the concrete. "What are you thinking?" Jennifer asked. "That every wall has a story. This one, for example. I remember the day I calculated the structure. I was worried about you. Emma had a test at school. Jason was upset with me. I poured everything into the math, the precision, and it worked. The wall stands firm, but it carries our story. You've always been a poet, you know? A poet? I'm an engineer. And a builder, and a poet, and a husband, and a father. That's a lot for one man. It's exactly the right measure." They walked home in comfortable silence. In the car, Richard reflected on the full journey. The ambitious young man who went to Japan seeking to conquer the world. The broken man who returned thinking he'd lost everything. The humble laborer who found dignity in hard work. The mature engineer who learned to balance all those men in one. "You know," he said to Jennifer, "if I could go back and change anything, I wouldn't change a thing." "Nothing?" she asked, surprised. "Every hardship brought us here. Every choice, even the ones that seemed wrong, built who we are today." They arrived home as the sun began to rise. Exhausted but happy, they fell asleep in each other's arms, just as they had for so many years. The next morning, Richard woke to the phone ringing. An unfamiliar voice spoke, Portuguese with a foreign accent. "Mr. Tanaka, my name is Hans Miller. I'm president of the International Sustainable Building Foundation. We'd like to invite you to receive the Humanitarian Award for Social Architecture." Richard sat up in bed, stunned. There must be some mistake. No mistake. Your work integrating Japanese techniques with American needs, creating dignified housing for vulnerable populations, is exactly what our foundation values. The ceremony is in Geneva, but we understand if you can't attend. To need to think, of course, but Mr. Tanaka, it's an honor to finally speak to the man behind so much change. Jennifer woke to the conversation. "What is it?" Richard told her about the award. Her eyes widened. "My God, Richard, international recognition." "It's strange. I spent years seeking recognition in Japan. Now that I've stopped looking, it finds me. Will you accept?" "I don't know. Geneva is far. I'd have to travel." "Richard Tanaka, you are accepting this award. Not for you, but for everyone who built with you. Mike, Frank, Dave, they all deserve to see your work recognized." She was right, as always. Weeks later, Richard was in Geneva. He insisted on taking Mike as the representative of all the workers. Frank paid for Dave's ticket. Jason and Emma also went, proud of their father. At the ceremony, the presenter read his biography, the brilliant engineer in Japan, the fall, the rebuilding as a mason, the transformed return. The room, filled with renowned architects and engineers, listened in respectful silence. When Richard took the stage, he saw familiar faces in the audience. Watanabe had come from Japan, American colleagues who had followed his journey, his family in the front row. "This award," he began, holding the trophy, "isn't mine. It belongs to every worker who believed that building is more than stacking bricks. It belongs to those who taught me humility when all I knew was ambition." He told stories about old George and his simple wisdom, about Frank and his transformation, about Mike and his determination to study, about the families in the residences, the children with bright bedrooms, the dreams sheltered in concrete and hope. I learned that there are many kinds of foundations, the technical ones we study in universities, and the human ones we learn in life. The best constructions have both. The audience gave a standing ovation. Richard stepped off the stage and was embraced by everyone. Mike wept openly. Dave took photos with them all. Jason and Emma were bursting with pride. That evening, dining at an elegant restaurant in Geneva, Emma asked a question. "Dad, are you happy?" Richard looked around. Jennifer was chatting animatedly with Mr. Watanabe's wife. Jason was showing photos of the residences to interested European architects. Mike and Dave laughed at some joke, comfortable despite the sophisticated setting. "I am, sweetheart, deeply happy, even after giving up so much." "I didn't give up. I chose. It's different. I chose you. I chose purpose over prestige. I chose to build lives, not just buildings." "No regrets?" "No regrets." Back in the United States, life resumed its rhythm, but something had changed. The award brought visibility, and with it, responsibility. Universities requested lectures, companies sought consulting work, governments asked for advice on social projects. Richard accepted some invitations, always keeping the balance he'd promised. He founded an institute naming Mike as co-director, focused on training construction workers with a social vision. One day, 5 years after Jason's wedding, Richard received a call that would complete the circle of his journey. Grandpa. It was his 4-year-old granddaughter, Lily. "Mommy said you build houses. Can you build one for me?" "What kind of house do you want, sweetheart?" "A happy house like ours." Richard smiled. Emily took the phone. "Sorry, Dad. She insists on calling to tell you everything." "Never apologize for that. Those are the best calls I get." "Actually, she's right to ask for a house. We're expecting our second baby." "Congratulations. Does Jason know?" "I'm telling him today we think it's time for a bigger home. I have the perfect lot, close to us with space for the kids." "Richard, we don't need anything special." "Emily, let a grandfather build a house for his grandchildren. It's what we do best." And so Richard found himself back in the thick of it, personally building his son's home. Jason worked alongside him on weekends. Mike brought his expertise. Frank supplied discounted materials. Dave coordinated the labor. It was like stepping back in time, but with all the experience they'd gained. Every wall carefully raised, every detail thoughtfully planned for the family who would live there. Emma, now an established doctor, came by with her boyfriend to help. Jennifer prepared lunch for everyone. It was community building in the best sense. On the day the house was finished, they held a housewarming party. Lily ran through the rooms shouting with joy. The new baby, Ethan, slept in Emily's arms. Richard found Jason on the porch looking out at the garden. "Thank you, Dad, for everything. I'm the one who should thank you, son, for giving me reasons to keep building." "You know what Lily told me yesterday? That when she grows up, she wants to be a builder like Grandpa. She'll surpass all of us. She already does. She doesn't see a difference between an engineer and a bricklayer. To her, you're just someone who builds. That's all I've ever been. Someone who builds." The sun set over New York City, the same city that had witnessed his entire journey. From the ambitious young man to the fulfilled man he was now, each phase had built the next. That night, Richard had a dream. He was on an endless construction site, but he wasn't alone. Thousands worked alongside him, everyone he'd ever known, everyone he'd influenced, everyone who'd influenced him. Together, they were building something grand, but it wasn't a building, it was the future. He woke with tears in his eyes and Jennifer looked worried. What's wrong? A good dream, the best I've ever had. Want to tell me about it? It was about construction, but not buildings, a legacy. The next day, Richard went to the office but couldn't focus. Something about the dream unsettled him, like a message he hadn't fully understood. Then Emma called. "Dad, I need to tell you something. Remember the family from Unit 302, the one you mentioned at Jason's wedding? The girl with depression?" "Yes. She's in college now, studying architecture. She said the extra window you designed didn't just save her life, it inspired her career. She wants to design spaces that heal people." Richard had to sit down. The ripples. Always the ripples, spreading farther than he could see. "Dad, are you there?" "I'm here, just moved." "There's more. She wants to intern with you. Said she needs to learn from someone who understands that building is about caring. Tell her to come by Monday." He hung up and stared out the window. Mr. Watanabe had been right all those years ago. The real legacy wasn't the structures, it was the lives. In that moment, Richard made a decision. He called Jason. "Son, what do you think about expanding the institute?" "Sir, how so?" "Creating a full-fledged school, not just technical skills, but the philosophy of building, teaching that every wall carries stories, every project affects lives." "Dad, that's huge." "I know, but it's necessary. How many Mikes are out there waiting for an opportunity? How many girls need extra windows? We'll need a lot of support. We have it. Frank, Mike, Dave, everyone who's built with us. And now Lily and the next generations. You never stop, do you?" "Stop building? Never. It's what I know how to do. It's who we are." The school became reality 2 years later. Richard, now 65, taught classes on foundations, not just the technical kind but the human ones. Mike taught hands-on skills, Jason handled social projects, Emma gave talks on how environments affect mental health. At the first graduation ceremony, Richard looked at the hopeful faces. Some reminded him of himself decades ago, ambitious, eager to conquer the world. Others reminded him of his bricklayer colleagues, practical, wanting to support their families. They'd all learned the same lesson. To build is to serve. Lily, now 8 years old, climbed onto the stage to hand out diplomas. Each graduate received from the little girl not just a piece of paper, but a symbol, the future acknowledging the present. After the ceremony, a young man approached Richard. "Professor, can I ask you something?" "Of course. As you've been so successful, have you ever thought about where you want to be buried?" The question caught Richard off guard. "Why do you ask?" "My grandfather was a bricklayer. He said a builder should know where they want to rest because we spend our lives building places for others." Richard smiled. "You know, I'd never thought about it, but now that you ask, it doesn't matter where my body rests. What I've built lives on in every person I've touched, every life I've changed. That's my true resting place." The young man walked away, thoughtful. Richard stayed there watching the graduates celebrate with their families. Jennifer appeared beside him. "Ready to go?" "Just one more minute." He looked around. One more time. The school he had created, the students he had shaped. His son coordinating, his daughter inspiring, his granddaughter running between the chairs, his son-in-law taking photos, his lifelong friends all there, part of something greater. "You know," he said to Jennifer, "I think I finally understand my dream." "Which one?" "The one about the infinite construction site. It wasn't about building forever. It was about realizing we never build alone. Every project is collective. Every wall is community." "My poetic engineer," she teased. "My dreamer bricklayer," he replied. They walked hand in hand outside, where the car was waiting. On the way, they passed a construction site. Richard stopped, watching the workers. One of them, a young man, was carefully laying bricks. Richard approached. "Good work," he praised. "Thank you, sir. I learned from my father. He always says every brick matters." "Your father is wise." "Yeah, he studied at a special school, the Building Hands Institute. Know it?" Richard smiled. "Yes, I do, very well." He returned to the car where Jennifer waited. "Another seed planted," she said. "Another bridge built," he corrected. They drove home in comfortable silence. Richard reflected on the entire journey. The full circle, yet always expanding. The bricklayer who spoke Japanese, the engineer who learned humility, the man who discovered that the best constructions are invisible. That night, before bed, Lily called. "Grandpa, today at school the teacher asked us to draw our hero. I drew you." "Why me, sweetheart?" "Because you build dreams, and dreams are more important than buildings." Richard couldn't answer. The child's wisdom echoed everything he had learned. "Grandpa, are you there?" "I'm here, darling, just moved." "Mom said you cry when you're happy, is that true?" "Yes, it's true." "Then you must be really happy, I am too. Good night, Grandpa Builder." "Good night, my little dream architect." He hung up and hugged Jennifer. "It was worth it," he whispered. "Every hard moment, every painful choice, it was worth it." "I know," she replied. "I always knew." They fell asleep in each other's arms, two builders of a life that had transcended bricks and cement to touch what truly matters: people, purpose, love. Outside, New York City pulsed with millions of stories. Somewhere, Mike was mentoring a new student. Frank was closing ethical deals. Dave was leading teams with dignity. Jason was designing homes, not just houses. Emma was healing spaces and people. Lily was dreaming of future constructions. And in every corner of the city, someone was laying a brick with extra care, remembering that building is more than a profession. It's a calling, a service, love made tangible in structures that shelter life. The bricklayer who had answered in Japanese had built his greatest project, a living legacy that would keep building long after his hands stopped. Because the best constructions never end. They live in every inspired person, every transformed life, every dream that finds structure to become reality. And so between walls and bridges, between foundations and dreams, the story continues. Always building. The end. And what about you, dear listener? Have you ever stopped to think about the invisible constructions in your life? Share your story of resilience and tough choices in the comments. If you enjoyed this, share it with someone who needs a reminder that it's never too late to rebuild. Thank you for joining us.